Welcome to the Week 5 Steel Scorpion Sports Podcast. I'm half your hosting team, Jeff Miller.
And I'm the other half, Mark Heflin.
And Mark, what a week 5 turned out to be. We saw the last of the undefeateds go down in the NFL. The reports of the Patriots' demise was greatly exaggerated as they took care of the Bengals, which you and I actually called a couple weeks ago. Also, the Arizona Cardinals traveled up to Denver and fell for the first time this year, which, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, we also called 2 weeks ago. And with Philly's loss at San Francisco, as we noted 2 weeks ago, we are at the first week of October, coming out of week 5, and there are no undefeateds left in the NFL. What do you have to say about that?
Seems really early. I don't have the research to know kind of what the average is across the last 10, 20 years. If I had to guess, it seems like it would probably be that the last undefeated team usually lasts until week 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that range. Of course, you had the 1 year a few years ago where New England went the full season, so that would skew the average a little bit. And I remember back in 2009 or something like that, you had the Colts and the Saints that both got the 13-0 in the same year. So to not even have an undefeated team after week 5 seems really early. But like I said, we did mention this 2 weeks ago. We kind of looked at the schedule when the Eagles, the Cardinals, and the Bengals were the last three after week 3. And looked at their schedules. They all had tough road games. Eagles at San Fran, Cincy at New England, Arizona at Denver. We pointed to those games specifically and said, those look like probable losses on the schedule. And it turned out in one of those three situations, the road team was actually favored. The Bengals were a 3-point favorite in New England in prime time, which, when you say it out loud, just sounds crazy. The Bengals favored in New England, and Tom Brady is starting, and Gronk is healthy. What kind of parallel universe are we living in? But as it turned out, of course, maybe the Patriots were probably motivated by that because they took the Bengals to the woodshed. So, that's where they stand right now.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone was surprised by the Patriots win. At least those people that pay attention to the NFL and closely monitor these things. It was coming off of an embarrassing loss back in prime time, as you said, in Foxborough. That's the kind of game that you expect them to win. I'll be more interested to see now in the next couple weeks when they can't pull the emotion of, we just got crushed on national TV. Let's rally the troops and win one for our embattled coaching staff or QB in Buffalo, or when they play Miami again in a few weeks. Divisional games, maybe you get up for a little, but you're not going to have the same emotion level that you did coming off the beatdown that Kansas City gave you and knowing you're turning around playing the last undefeated team in your house on Monday night. I'll be interested to see this week, next week, do the Patriots revert back to the form we saw for the first 4 weeks, or can they use this as a springboard and turn it around and be the Patriots that most people thought they would be, the playoff contender, possibly the AFC Championship game level contender?
And speaking of that, New England plays at Buffalo this week, of course, is naturally revitalized by Kyle Orton as their QB, and of course, why wouldn't it be? But that game is for first place in the AFC East. You've got the Bills and the Patriots sitting there at 3-2. The winner of that game will be 4-2, and then sole possession of first place in the AFC East, which is looking like a pretty weak division right now. But what were your thoughts on the Bills pulling the plug on the E.J. Manuel experience, at least for now, putting in clear journeyman Kyle Orton? I mean, they just took Manuel in the first round of last year's draft, and already less than 1.5 seasons into it, they're pulling him for Orton. What do you think the long-term ramifications of that are going to be?
I actually support pulling him because I saw a couple of their games, and he looked horrible. And as a Sammy Watkins owner in fantasy, I realized E.J. Manuel could not throw the ball outside of the numbers towards the wide receivers. That kind of hinders the value of your big trade this year to get Sammy Watkins. And not to take anything away from E.J. Manuel and his style, but the neck beard that is Kyle Orton really exudes confidence. And I think that's really what they were going for. They wanted a manly man under center. And a pudgy neck-bearded man, I mean, that really leads the troops down the field to get you game-winning field goals, as we saw this week.
I was possibly underestimating the neck-beard factor, but where does that leave the Bills for next year? You have the flashy first-round wide receiver that you traded up for last year, so they have no first-round pick next year. But if he's already determined that E.J. Manuel may not be the answer, and it turns out that rumors are starting to fly that Jimbo Fisher even told teams that, hey, look, E.J. Manuel is a good person, good guy, but not quite sure he's an NFL quarterback. So looks like maybe he's correct. And then the Bills, where do they turn now? Hal Horton, may fill in for this year. Certainly he's not the long-term answer that you're going to build your team around. So what do you think they're going to look at QB going forward?
Well, we have seen in the last few years that you could get a quality QB in the second round of a draft. They may have to look to go that avenue next year because, as you mentioned, they've traded away the first-round pick. Or maybe this is a good thing for E.J. Manuel. He's been benched. He's going to get to work behind a professional, see how this really goes. Maybe with extra coaching from Doug Marrone, who's supposedly a quarterback whisperer back in his days with Ryan Nassib at Syracuse, made him into a competent college quarterback. Maybe the extra work on the sidelines will translate into E.J. Manuel being ready next year. I'm not of the mind that says you can't pull your quarterback if he's horrible, even when he's young and he's been in there. Sit him and work with him, as long as you message it properly with him. I mean, it's any, and this is coming from someone that's been in a real business job, not a professional sports world. But if you can't get the job done, they'll put somebody in that can, and then if you turn around and can do the job later, the TPS file, they'll then let you do the TPS file if you're the best at it. They don't care who's doing the TPS file as long as the TPS file gets done.
That's true. Those are some good points. We'll see how that shakes out for the Bills next year and the rest of this year, I guess. Speaking of QBs that have been benched and staying in the AFC East, the Jets, they just were horrible. They were the first team to actually be shut out this season. They now stand at 0-4, and I know you're thinking, oh, no, they have a win. Well, they won against the Raiders, so I think we can all agree that that doesn't really count when you beat an 0-5 team. That's actually, I guess 0-4. The Raiders have had a bye, but still.
Actually, Mark, they lost on the bye. It was very embarrassing.
It would not surprise me, though. Actually, on the drive into work this morning, I heard some local radio guys that were celebrating the Raiders for ending their losing streak, about the fact that they actually went a week without losing. So they celebrate those things around here, and the Raiders actually go a week without losing. But back in the Jets, 1-4, the one win at home against the Raiders, it wasn't even that convincing. And now, they got shut out against the Chargers. Geno Smith, horrible. Like Vic came in, didn't look much better. I have the numbers in front of me. I think they threw around 30 passes or so, and only had all of 79 passing yards. Not even sure how that's possible, but so where do you think they go from here? They also have a quarterback situation. Rex Ryan looks like he might be fighting for his job. What do you think? How do you think the Jets season is going to play out, and who do you think is going to be their coach and QB in 2015?
That's a great question. I think you almost have to go even further up the chain. John Isnick is the GM. I'm not sure that he's even competent. They have salary cap room. They didn't sign any cornerbacks. They even let Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie leave. They seem to lack any skill at the wide receiver position. They signed Eric Decker as their only big free agent there. Not really surrounding your young quarterback with a lot of talent. And then the drafting of Geno Smith itself doesn't really exude confidence in my mind. I think Geno is not going to be a great quarterback in the NFL. I thought this from day one, so this isn't me changing my tune. But also there were reports today that he, on the road out here in San Diego, missed team meetings because he went to a movie. I believe he went to see Gone Girl. I heard Ben Affleck is great in that because he can actually be himself, and he actually looks like that surprised guy that doesn't realize that he's in trouble. So that. I heard it's a great movie, so good for Geno. He apparently didn't realize that when you go to the Pacific time zone from the Eastern time zone, the clocks are 3 hours different. I could see where that would be confusing for people that probably have never traveled before because he's a rookie, right? He didn't do this all of last year when he was a rookie. Oh wait, no, he did. So very confusing to me that if you want to be an NFL quarterback, that you're out watching movies on the road. You're not even breaking down film or going over your game plan. You're out watching Ben Affleck. So more power to Geno. I think he's going to be gone. The Jets, at least, as opposed to Buffalo, have a first-round pick next year, so there's a chance they could draft a quarterback because if they continue on this trajectory that you have them on, they will not win another game. because they don't get to play the Raiders again. But that did lead me to one interesting point. So far, the AFC East, I believe, is 3-0 against the Raiders. Is that correct? New England has that bye week that we call the Raiders. Miami won the London game against the Raiders, and the Jets' only win is against the Raiders. So that means Buffalo is in the driver's seat for the AFC East, right? Because they still have the Raiders on the schedule.
That is a good point, yes. The division is 3-0 against the Raiders, and yeah, the Bills still have that game coming out. I do want to defend Gino real quickly before we research his character too much. I think there was just a misunderstanding. You mentioned the word film. I think what happened is the coaches mentioned that they were going to watch film. What they meant was they were going to break down some game film of the Chargers, but he misheard. He thought they said they were going to a film, so he showed up. He thought all his teammates were going to be there, and he figured that maybe I just heard the wrong theater. Maybe they're at a different theater, but I'm here now. I might as well go see the movie. So I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding on his part. I'm sure it wasn't a case of the leader of the team just choosing to skip meetings and go see a movie. But my lord, that situation seems pretty messed up there.
Yeah, and the worst part about it is he didn't even call me to say, hey, do you want to go see a movie? I'm in town. I could have headed out. We could have had, grabbed our popcorn and sat back and watched a good film. Maybe T.O. would have showed up. It would have been great. But be that as it may, I don't think Gino's the long-term answer. I'm not sure that Rex will be back. Fairly certain he won't, because I think their season's going to spiral out of control. And then you have to look at the GM. I mean, really, if you haven't surrounded your young quarterback with any talent, you haven't spent any of your money in free agency to bring in any talent, you keep missing on corners, your drafts haven't been good, not certain what you're hanging your hat on. That's the big problem, I think, there. So, yeah, the AFC East is a dumpster fire when it comes to quarterbacks. I mean, Tannehill, sadly, is probably the second most competent quarterback and the safest in his position, and it was just 2 weeks ago he didn't even get a vote of confidence from his own coach. So when he's the second most competent and longest tenured quarterback and safest at his position, I think that says all that we need to say about the quarterbacks in that division.
This is very true. Since we have talked about Oklahoma, let's touch on them real quick. Do you think they have any hope at all for this year? I'm going to say no. Being at 0-4, being in a division with seemingly two of the best teams in the AFC, San Diego and Denver, that they're probably done for this year. But they do have a new interim coach in town, Tony Sparano, who's been a head coach before at Miami. Do you think he's a potential long-term solution? If not, what kind of candidates or even specific names do you think they should look for next year? And what do you think they should do with the QB situation? They'll obviously evaluate Carr for the rest of this year as much as they can, but then they're going to have a high draft pick next year. Do you think maybe they should lean towards a Mariota, a Winston, a Hundley, or stick with Carr, or bring in a veteran free agent and use that high draft pick to address another need?
Well, I think to start with the coaching situation and to make Raider fans happy, I'm certain we'll hear names like John Gruden and Jim Harbaugh and any other big name that you can think of, maybe Bill Cowher, Mike Holmgren. Unfortunately, if any of them have any sense left in their brains, they'll look at that situation and run, screaming, as fast as they can away from it. There is a lack of talent in that organization right now. And I know Jim Harbaugh came into the San Francisco situation and took a perennial loser and turned it around. But there was at least defensive talent there. He could see that they had stockpiled a few good players, and he just whipped them into shape and turned that around quickly. I'm not sure that you could get a combination of Newt Rockne and Vince Lombardi and Mike Ditka and get anything out of the Raiders roster right now. So to answer your second question on the quarterback situation, I definitely think you evaluate Carr. I'm listening to a lot of the pundits on ESPN and Fox and others. They actually say Carr has all the makings, and even in these games they're getting beat, he's showing good things that you could build off of. He's showing presence in the pocket. He moves his feet well. He's got a better than advertised arm, and he's making good throws, good decisions. It's just the offensive line isn't great. The weapons aren't great. The team's not great. By the time he's out there the second or third series, they're already down 2 scores. Kind of limits what you can do in a game. They have no running game. So if you get past all that, it looks like he might be a competent quarterback. So give him a chance this year. Definitely evaluate him. And then I think it'll depend on the coach you bring in, whether or not you're looking at a Mariota or a Hundley or Winston next year, or if you look to bring in a veteran, I mean, a Matt Schaub. Oh, they already did that. Never mind. They already got rid of Carson Palmer too, so maybe Matt Flynn's available. No, they've done that. Maybe Jeff George will come out of retirement, or Vince Evans, for those of you that are a little older. This will be great. Todd Marinovich. The Raiders have a history of great QB play, so I think they can just go that avenue.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be kind of a bad situation that they've been bad for a long time. I would, speaking of all the X-rated quarterbacks that they could bring back, I would throw Rich Gannon in there, but he's torched the team recently, so I don't think he has any interest in going back there, nor would they have any interest in bringing him back. But yeah, the situation has been bad for a long time, and you kind of have to feel for Raiders fans, and maybe they'll eventually move to LA. The stadium they play in here now certainly isn't that great, so we'll see what happens there over the next couple of years. But looking at the NFL this year, who would you say are your top, say, 5 teams in the NFL right now?
All right, well, my power rankings, this is after the Monday night game. Seattle did pull out a victory over Washington tonight, so they've continued on their upward trajectory. They actually looked a little better on the road than they had in some of the past games from last year and earlier this year, the San Diego game. So I'm going to put Seattle at the top, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I don't think I need to go into the reasons why the defending Super Bowl champions with a great defense and a quarterback who is ridiculously talented and seems to be able to escape every situation and make the right decision is my number 1 team. So I'll leave it at that. The number 2 slot, I'd have to throw in the Denver Broncos. And obviously Peyton Manning continues to perform at such a high level, and the defense has improved. And you saw that game up in Seattle. They took them to overtime, and that was in Seattle. If that is a Super Bowl preview and it's going to be on a neutral field, you have to like our chances of seeing a better game than last year. And I think that's all anybody wants is let's get them together and let's have a better game than last year. And hey, if it turned out to be Seattle and Denver, more power to those guys. I think third, San Diego Chargers. They beat Seattle. Their only loss is a tight one to Arizona. It was that late Monday night game to start the season, the Monday night doubleheader. And really they had a nice lead going into the fourth quarter and should have put it away. But since then, they've actually progressed, beat Seattle, they beat some other teams they should have. This week, they're going to Oakland. We've said enough about Oakland, but I will say it's actually a pretty big game for San Diego. It's a natural rivalry between Oakland and San Diego to begin with, but also San Diego tends not to play well in Oakland. So this is a big hurdle game for them. If San Diego can get past Oakland, suddenly they're going to roll into Denver in a couple weeks, and both those teams probably will have one loss, and that's going to look like an AFC title preview. So that's pretty impressive to think that you could have 2 teams from the same division that probably are the class of the AFC. After that, I'd probably flip back to the NFC. Even though the record isn't there, I think San Francisco is getting by right now, and getting by with grit and determination and a running game. Kaepernick hasn't looked good. But you know what's going to happen in a couple weeks? Is they're going to get 2 really good defenders back. And when you throw Navarro Bowman and Alden Smith back in that lineup, that defense is going to be even better than it is now, and it's playing pretty well. And then when you start getting shorter fields and you start getting turnovers and the offense feels like it can open up a bit, I think they're going to get on a roll near the end of the season. I think people are overlooking the fact that they get to a winning record and they're doing better than just treading water right now. It's setting them up for a great run when they start getting these not just good players. These are all pro players that are coming back. So I'd throw San Francisco in there. And then for fun, I'd throw the Dallas Cowboys in at 5th right now. They've learned that Tony Romo should not be the focal point of the offense. It actually should be DeMarco Murray. The defense is not nearly as horrible as we all anticipated it would be. And I'm only doing this for 1 week because I fully anticipate they're going to go up to Seattle and get embarrassed this week, and then I can drop them out of my top 5. But I wanted to give them some props for the good start. And then maybe Jerry Jones will invite me down to Jerry's World, and I can cheer for the other team, just like everybody else in the stadium, and it'll be great. So that's what I'd go with for a top 5. What about you?
It's a pretty good top 5. I would completely agree with you on 1, 2, and 3, both the teams and the order. San Francisco, I agree with your logic, and I see that you're looking forward to the future and some of the players that to get back. As of right now, if I'm looking at weeks 1 through 5, I would not put them at number 4. In addition, I have some concerns with QB play. Kaepernick is a good young quarterback. He's played some good games, but he still also looks erratic at times. He looks flustered. The offensive line hasn't seemed to be as good as it's been in the past. It's been on the run a lot. And I don't have enough faith in his decision-making ability if it's going to come down to it on some busted plays. But yes, I do believe that they will get better as the season goes on and they get some of those defensive guys back. The Cowboys certainly have looked good. I'm not sure if they would put them at number 5. I would probably put the Bengals at number 4. I know they just looked bad on Monday night, so we have some recency bias against them as far as putting them that high. But the first 2 games, they looked really good. The defense is really good. I think it was just one of those situations. You have certain games that just don't go your way. New England was very motivated. They definitely wanted to come out and make a statement, and they did. And I think maybe just the Bengals weren't quite prepared, but I think they'll take a lesson from that. I think they'll come back strong this week and beat Carolina at home, move to 4-1. I'm going to put them at number 4 in my power rankings. Number 5, you could, probably talk me into about 8 different teams. I think it's kind of a toss-up at number 5. You could potentially put the Eagles there. You could, I guess, potentially put the Cowboys there. You could potentially put Detroit there, especially if you consider once they have Calvin Johnson back to full health. The last 2 to 3 games, he's basically just been a decoy. I think I read where he has 3 catches in the last 3 games. But, he's, when healthy, he's the number 1 wide receiver in football. So get him back, and if they find a good kicker, if they get Matt Prater or someone along those lines who does better than 4 out of 12 on field goals. He missed 3 makeable, or Alex Henry, they missed 3 makeable field goals on Sunday. If he makes 1 or 2 of those, it's probably 4-1 right now. You could potentially convince me of Arizona at number 5, at San Francisco at number 5, at New England at number 5, maybe even Baltimore or Indianapolis. So I think there's a lot of potential teams that you could convince me are the 5th best team in the NFL right now.
All right. Well, I will say your Cincinnati pick, I contemplated them for 4 and 5, but I have 2 words for you that keep them out, and it's not recency bias. It's the red rifle, Andy Dalton. That may be more than 2 words. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't have that much faith in him. I think he's what's going to hold them back. You've seen in the past, he's a competent quarterback. He's fine when you're doing the typical game management, and you're doing a fine play defense, win some low-scoring tight games in the regular season. I believe his career playoff record is similar to yours in terms of wins. So, for those that don't know, Mark never played in the NFL, so it's very comparable.
But I have played Madden, and I think I've got some playoff wins there. So if we're counting that, then technically I have more playoff wins than Andy Dalton.
It's a good point. I forgot you are a beast at Madden. And Super Tech Mobile. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
And RBI Baseball, for those that remember the Super NES. Mark was a wizard at RBI Baseball.
That was probably my strongest game of all of them, but we won't go down that rabbit hole.
We digress. All right, with that, we've talked about the top 5. We've obviously mentioned a few of the worst teams. Any surprises to you so far in the season? 1 or 2 teams that stand out as, wow, that I didn't see them coming as being good, or I expected them to be good, and oh, are they bad?
The first one that comes to mind is the Saints. They were a popular preseason pick by all the quote-unquote experts to either win the Super Bowl or at least get there or win the NFC. They just, they haven't looked great, and Drew Brees hasn't seemed like his normal self so far. I think they haven't maybe fully utilized Brandon Cooks yet. Jimmy Graham got injured in Week 5. Now they thankfully have a bye in Week 6 for him to get injured. Maybe they can, reassess what they're doing on offense, and maybe they'll come out and look better. Now, some of the losses have been close. They lost in Week 1 to Atlanta. It was a field goal game. They lost, Week 3 to Cleveland on the road, which is a field goal game. So they've had some close calls, but the defense has not been anywhere near what people expected. They just lost Jarius Byrd for the rest of the season, so that's going to impact them when they go out and get a Pro Bowl defensive back that's no longer going to be patrolling the safety position for them for the rest of this year. So we'll see if they come back. As far as good surprises, San Diego, I think people expected to be good. They were kind of one of those under-the-radar teams that people thought might have a breakout season, but I'm not sure that anyone expected them to be this good. They're 4-1. They've looked really good. Like you said, the one loss was a close one in Week 1 in Arizona. They're the only team that's beaten the defending Super Bowl champions so far. And they have a matchup in a few weeks against the Broncos, and I think that's where we'll truly see just how good the Chargers are so far.
Yeah, I think one team that surprised me, and I know a lot of pundits had said coming into the season, Cleveland would likely hit the bye week without a win, and then it would be Johnny Manziel time. We'd all be rolling our money. We'd all be talking about, I can't hear you because I got so much money in my ears. It would have been great, except for Brian Hoyer apparently didn't hear any of that, and he's actually led them to a couple nice wins. So they actually make it through the first part of the season, and they're a very competent team. And if you think back to that Week 1 game, they give Pittsburgh, they spot them, a 24-point lead, and then they come all the way back and almost win the game. Since then, they've actually been a very good team. They've played a pretty decent schedule, which is why everyone thought they would be so far down by now. They had the New Orleans game, as you mentioned, but they won that. And so I'd say Cleveland's probably the biggest surprise to me on a positive side. And from a negative side, I think I'd probably have to agree with you. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else. Maybe Chicago, that's a bit of a disappointment. A lot of people touted the Saints as a Super Bowl team, and Chicago is that team that maybe could take the NFC Norris division. But yeah, it doesn't look like they're going to. Things just look a mess. The defense, they don't have any clue what's going on there. They can't stop anyone. The offense at times looks good, but apparently Jay Cutler is not good tight BFFs with Alshon Jeffrey in the red zone, which you've noted in previous podcasts. So maybe they need to spend some more time together. Maybe they should go see Gone Girl together. They could call Gino, find out where it's playing. Maybe they can get some good bonding and get the red zone efficiency up so that it's not just Brandon Marshall, but it's the whole team. That'd be great. But yeah, I just feel like the Bears were supposed to be better this year. Don't feel like they've performed nearly where people expected them to be at this point.
Yeah, speaking of the Bears, I saw a kind of a crazy stat today on Twitter. So a lot of people said that the Bears probably have either the best or one of the best 1-2 wide receiver combos in the game with Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. And right now, through Week 5, the top 2 players as far as targets go for the Bears are Matt Forte and Martellus Bennett. Now, I grant you that Martellus Bennett is a pretty good tight end, and that Matt Forte is one of the better receiving running backs in the league. But, come on. You have 2 of the best wide receivers, and I grant you that they had a little bit of an injury issue. They haven't missed any games. They were questionable. There were games that they, might not be able to play that they ended up playing. So they have had a little bit of touch-and-go injury situations, but still, they have to start getting Marshall and Jeffrey more involved, and maybe as they get back to full health, maybe we'll see that come to fruition. But yeah, like you said, we didn't really expect them to get 2 and 3 at this point, but part of that is they have themselves to blame. They had a 2-touchdown lead on Carolina that they blew, and of course they blew that home game to the Bills. So they could potentially be looking at 4-1. Because they've had some nice performances. They went into San Francisco, first ever official game in the new stadium. They won there. They won on the road at the Jets. But, that's not too impressive, I guess. But yeah, they should potentially do better than the 2 and 3 that they're right now.
Yeah, so I think that's good for the NFL wrap-up for the week. But what I wanted to do quickly is touch on a couple of fantasy tidbits. Last week on the podcast, Mark, we mentioned how Eddie Lacy was approaching bust status. Well, thanks to us, and Eddie Lacy must be a listener. He turned in a great performance this week, so Eddie Lacy owners finally got off the schneid, felt better about that first-round pick. So I think this week it's time to call out another first-round running back that was drafted probably number 1 overall or number 2 overall in almost every league, and that would be LaShawn McCoy. And for those that know LaShawn, you can send him the link to the podcast so he can use this as proper motivation, and I fully expect the next week he'll go for 120 and 3 touchdowns. But up till now, I'm not sure he has 120 and 3 touchdowns combined. And I know that many of his owners, especially in our leagues and Steel Scorpion Sports, have chosen to multiply him at different times. That hasn't benefited them at all so far this season. He hasn't had a breakout game. So now we're approaching first round bust territory on an even bigger running back than Eddie Lacy, and that would be LeSean McCoy.
Yeah, in weeks 3 and 4, he had really bad performances, but people expected that he would have a breakout game or a breakout performance against the Rams, which did not come to fruition. He got the touches that people expected. He had 28 touches in total, 24 carries and 4 receptions, but only made 86 yards out of 28 touches. So if you do the math on that, not so good, and did not get into the end zone either. So I definitely could see why a team chose to 3X him this week, but it turns out it did not work, and that team, at least in our league, 3X McCoy only finished with 1 win. So definitely not what you're expecting when you use a 3X. We actually had 4 3Xs this week. We had the one that I just mentioned that finished with 1 win. We had another team that used a 3X on Giovanni Bernard, which I thought was a little bit questionable situation, especially since you're playing on the road at New England. The first 4 games, I think the thinking probably was, hey, in week 4, New England played against the Chiefs, and I saw Jamal Charles and now Davis just run up and down the field against them. So I can kind of see the logic there, but when you factor in all the other things that we said as far as, the Patriots were embarrassed, they're going to want to make a statement, they're at home, they're in prime time, probably not the best game to 3X Giovanni Bernard. I haven't looked at the Bengals schedule, but I'm sure over the next few weeks there probably would have been a better scenario to multiply him. You probably want to multiply him in a game where they're playing a weak opponent. Maybe they get a good halftime lead, and then they're going to be running Giovanni Bernard a lot in the second half to pick up some carries, maybe some touchdowns. And that was not the situation that we had this week. And then we had 2 teams that used very good 3Xs on DeMarco Murray. So congratulations to you. And the other one was on Russell Wilson, which turned out to be very fortuitous because it just so happened that in the same week that this team used a 3X on Russell Wilson, he had the best fantasy performance so far in his career.
Yeah, so 2+ years of Russell Wilson, and that's the single greatest game he's produced, so that's pretty impressive. I do want to point out one other thing I forgot to mention earlier. Another friend of the podcast, Tom Brady, clearly used our least valuable player comment last week, most disappointing player, to fuel the Monday night performance. So Tom, when you check this out, you're welcome. So Mark, I think that'll lead us into, and you've already given us a preview of this, but our multiplier and our multiply of the week. For those that don't remember, multiplier of the week is the best use of the multiplier in our Steel Scorpion Sports Leagues, and the multiply of the week is the player that was multiplied that the owner now has to spit that player's name out of his mouth to get that bad taste out. So Mark, why don't you take us through the multiplier of the week?
The multiplier of the week, I think you could actually make an argument for a couple different guys. One would be the 3X on Russell Wilson. Just perfect timing to use it. Clearly they didn't expect to get 30-plus points out of them, but it worked. But at the same time, based on how well their team did, they actually could have just used a 2X on Russell Wilson. They would have only gotten 1 less win, and they would still have that 3X in their back pocket. Not to toot my own horn here, but I used the 2X on Golden Tate this week. He had a really good game. Part of my thinking was that, Calvin Johnson is hobbled. Not sure how effective he was going to be. I heard that he was going to be active, but what we've seen from the last couple of weeks, I had to figure that Golden Tate was going to get a fair amount of the action. And he got me around 27 fantasy points. So that turned out to be quite beneficial to me. As far as multiply of the week, I think maybe we have to go with Giovanni Bernard just because it was a 3X, and he only got around 8 or so points in that game. And you just hate to use a 3X and only get 8 points out of it. When you got more than 8 points using the multiplier, but you hate to use a 3X on a player that only got 8 points.
Yeah, and again, I think the other reason, as you mentioned earlier, the logic that went behind it, going against a New England team that was going to be sufficiently motivated, seemed like an odd time to throw a 3x out there. So I'll agree with you there. So congratulations, Gio Bernard. You are the multiplier of the week. And with that, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask one more favor of you, Mark. I'm in a couple survivor pools. I know many of our listeners might be as well. This is a relatively difficult week because weeks past, there's been at least one or two really strong home teams, people hosting the Titans, the Jets, the Jags. Those always seem like pretty obvious picks. This week, the home team's not as strong. So why don't you give me a couple picks that I might want to spread over my cards for the survivor pools this week?
Yeah, so usually when I'm looking for a survivor pick, I try to take a home team. Just in general, I feel safer about taking a team that's playing at home versus a team that's playing on the road. And I also try, if possible, to avoid interdivisional matchups just because they're less predictable. The teams know each other more. You tend to see more upsets and just unpredictable things that can happen. So that's kind of two of my general rules. This week, it's looking pretty tough. When you look at some of the home teams, the Titans are almost a touchdown favorite at home. They're playing the Jaguars, but if you really want to invest your survivor pool on 1-4 team that might be starting Charlie Whitehurst.
I have a couple rules that you didn't mention. One of them is I never start a team. I can never pick a team that starts Charlie Whitehurst or even has him on the roster. So I'm gonna have to scratch Tennessee off. My other rule is I can never pick the Oakland Raiders. In fact, I almost always have to pick against them, just to get those out there.
Yeah, no, and those are good rules. And this year, you try to pick on the bad teams, and I think picking on the bad teams is what's going to lead me to maybe looking at the Broncos. Now, they violate one of my rules in the fact that they're on the road, and they do have to travel, across the country to the East Coast. But man, the Jets are bad. They just got shut up by the Chargers. They have, a little bit of a mini QB controversy. I just don't see how they can hang with the Broncos. The other one, and it's tough because this is probably the second best choice this week, but it violates both of my rules because it's a road team and it's interdivisional, and like you even mentioned earlier, it's a place where they have trouble playing, and that's the Chargers of the Raiders. It's actually the second highest point spread of the week, so based on that, you might feel safe, but for all the other reasons, kind of one you might want to stay away from. And if you do stay away from that, the next best choices are probably either the Bengals at home against the Panthers. The Bengals should be probably motivated after what they just had happened to them at New England. And then the Seahawks are at home against the Cowboys. Cowboys are playing well, 4-1, but as we know, the Seahawks are just so tough at home.
Yeah, although those two games that you mentioned at the end violate not a hard and fast rule I have, but an item I like to avoid, which is the short week. So both Cincinnati and Seattle played away in the night games Sunday and Monday. So obviously they both have a little shorter week than normal. But I do agree. I think Cincinnati's going to win and beat Carolina, which I'm pulling for in more ways than one with my wager on the under on Carolina's win total for the season. And I do think Seattle is nearly unbeatable up in the Pacific Northwest. So the fact that they stayed overnight, so Pete Carroll does it a little differently than other coaches, and hey, what a novel concept. Instead of going to the plane and flying all the way back across the country right after the game and not getting any sleep there, and then you're all jacked up anyway, he said, no, we're going to go back to the hotel, we're going to sleep, get up in the morning, get on the plane, fly back to Seattle. Seems so insignificant, that little difference, but it's so huge. For any of you that travel, you know the difference between flying on a red eye and trying to be any type of coherent the next day versus getting a normal rest, getting on an airplane, spending 4 hours, 5 hours in the airplane, and then going about your business. So it's funny that Seattle thinks of that, but most of these other teams haven't quite grasped that concept. So we'll see if...
Yeah, I actually hadn't heard that they were doing that, but I do like that strategy. It seems to make a lot of sense. And I just like the fact that they're doing it in a different way than everyone else. I don't like the group think of, well, everyone else does it a certain way, so we have to. And that's one of the things I like about Chip Kelly as well. He came in the NFL, and a lot of people try to say, like, this is the way that things are done. And he said, well, no, I disagree. I want to do things this way. and so far he's been pretty successful at it.
Yeah, no, he's been very successful. Unfortunately for him, Oregon continues to be successful at losing one game against unranked teams every year when he was there and since he's been gone. So for those college football fans, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But with that, Mark, I think we're wrapped up for the evening. I'll try and get some special guests, hosts on with us next week. Maybe we could call out to Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal. They'll be serving the last of their 3-week hiatus from ESPN. Maybe they'll have some free time and want to join our podcast. For those that haven't been checking out the website, go out to steelscorpionsports.com, click on the blogs page. You can check out all the old podcasts. Mark and I have been doing our homage to Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal, and doing the line game while they're on their 3-week forced hiatus from ESPN. And so far, after 2 weeks of the line game, Mark won a week, I won a week. So we have a pivotal third week coming up here. The loser will have his team renamed in the Jaguar League by the winner. I have some really great ideas for when I get to rename Mark's team, so you'll definitely want to pay attention to that. Check out the podcast next week, and then check into the league to see exactly what I renamed Mark's team. We'll probably post it in the blog so everybody can have a quick gander at Mark's new team name after I win.
We'll see about that. I have some good ideas in mind. It might have something to do with Justin Bieber, maybe. But I'm thinking of some other options as well. But I look forward to renaming your team.
Well, if I can just get half the Twitter followers that Justin Bieber has, then I guess I can call it a day, because every time I tweet something, I'll be hitting 20 million people or whatever ridiculous number that would be. So with that, I'm going to sign off from San Diego for our Week 5 podcast. So this is Jeff Miller.
Signing off San Jose, this is Mark Huffman.
And we'll see you next week for our line game, the finale. Thanks, everybody.